We're all imperfect, and on this podcast, I'll be chatting with a variety of interesting people who are willing to make themselves vulnerable by sharing their own struggles and imperfections.
I think for a lot of gay guys, there is a feeling through adult life that you really have to prove yourself. Mm-hmm. And I definitely know that for me, there was this relentless pursuit of trying to make my family proud because I knew that there was this thing that one day they would know that wouldn't make them proud.
I'm Hugh Van Kylenberg from the Resilience Project.
And I'm Ryan Shelton from my mum.
And I'm Josh from Hugh's mum.
And this is The Imperfects.
Hello Josh, hello Ryan, and hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode.
Hello Hugh. Hello Josh. Hello everyone.
Hello Hugh. Hello Ryan. Hello everyone.
Let's not make a habit of doing that.
Yeah, it can't be our new tagline that opens the show.
It's quite long.
Speaking of long, the episode is long. The chat is fascinating and it's long. It's Hamish Macdonald. He is so great to listen to. Mm-hmm. And we found it very hard to trim it down because everything he says is so fascinating. What a divine and wonderful man he is.
Oh. He really is, and says some extraordinarily smart things. I haven't stopped thinking about his thoughts on social media, which he talks about later in the episode, but that particularly was like,
huge.
Good.
Yeah, his stuff on burnout and exhaustion through work and just trying to prove someone wrong, I'm going to do this to prove people wrong, even if it's detrimental to my own health. That was really fascinating to me. So we're going to hear all that. Before we jump into that, and this is going to be a quick intro, this has got nothing to do with Hamish Macdonald. This has got to do with you, Josh.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I just want to play something. That's okay.
Oh, do we need any context before hearing this? I have no idea what it is.
No, we'll give you context. So everyone knows Josh's song's been out for a little while now.
And if you don't, Josh is a musician. He recently wrote and released his first song, which is incredible. We'll link it in the show notes, and also to the music video, which is absolutely extraordinary.
Yes.
Bit of context.
I was chatting with Missy Higgins over voice message the other day, and I just want to play something that she said.
Bit of context around Missy Higgins. She is an Australian recording artist.
I'm nervous.
The voice notes need a bit of... No.
Yeah, so sometimes notes are written in text. Voice notes are audible only. So it's a bit of context around voice notes.
Yes, and so you might have people in your life that you text or WhatsApp or voice note. Missy very much falls into the voice note category for me, and she sent me this. And I won't play the whole message, but here's a bit that will concern you. Not concern you.
God, this is... Can you just pass on to Josh these songs shit?
Here's something that will not concern you. It'll actually tickle you, I think.
A bit of context on tickling. Sorry, I don't want to hold this up any longer. Let's play.
I told you about our neighbour that we call.
Oh God!
I told you about our neighbour that we call the.
I'm dying. You just.
Oh, sorry.
You
Anyway,
just set me up with this.
Okay. Here we go, Josh. This is from Missy Higgins. I hope it works.
Bit of context on withholding joy.
Here we go.
Hey, Josh's song is really beautiful. When you sent that message, I had to listen to it and listen to your episode about it. And it's so, oh my God, it's so touching. It's a really, and very catchy too. He's a great songwriter. I kind of want him to make a whole album now, but it sounds like that was really hard for him to do in a massive step. So maybe that's enough. And God, he should be so proud.
Holy shit.
Missy effing Higgins.
She said I'm a good songwriter.
She sure did. She's not wrong.
Oh my, I'm speechless. As far as hearing from someone that you're a good songwriter, there's very few people in the world I could think of who could top Missy Higgins telling you that. That is unbelievable.
And for anyone who's heard her episode on this podcast, then you know she understands the kind of like how hard it is to write music and so I think she would probably sounds like she really relates to how difficult that is to do. Yeah.
And also like it's to rephrase that, I think to give more to it, like it's very rare that I've heard from a few people that they've had an emotional reaction to the song I've written, which is the most incredible thing I can imagine. And there's very few songwriters who I've had a visceral, like extreme emotional reaction to their songwriting, and Missy Higgins is one of them with her song "Oh Canada." That floors me every time I hear it.
Yeah,
So to hear, I don't know, hearing someone who you respect that much, who you love their work that much, it's yeah, I don't know what to say. It doesn't get much better.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Well, on that note, let's go to Hamish Macdonald, I reckon.
Josh, that is amazing, isn't it? I tempted to try and write a song so I can also be praised by Missy Higgins.
Do you reckon she'd? I do want to write an album, but I'm scared. Maybe I should call her and ask her for some tips on how to.
You've got to
get
write
to
an
the next.
album. You got to do an album.
I really want to, but I must admit, I'm kind of. You know how you hear about bands who have an album, they're like, the nervous second album of how you do it. I'm like nervous about the second song.
Yeah, that doesn't exist. Nah, it's only album to album. I think I would say that to write an album means that you've got more to say than just what you said in that song, and I think you probably do.
I think I probably do. I just have no idea what it is, but it takes. I think it's worth it. If Missy says I should do it, I'm going to do it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm going to try. I'll try.
Oh, that is really exciting.
By the end of this episode, Josh is going to have an album written.
I don't know if you remember this, Josh, but
sorry, I didn't mean to commit to doing it on air. I just like that.
No,
I'd be stupid not to. I mean, I feel inspired. Yeah,
Commit to thinking about it.
Commit to thinking about it. Yeah.
Pinky promise.
Yeah.
Do you remember at our cricket club we went and spent a whole day once in Sri Lanka. We said, do you know what needs a reboot? Sayings. Sayings are so outdated. Like a rolling stone gathers no moss. And so we decided to come up with a list of new sayings, contemporary sayings. And one of them was, the saying was, you've released an album, which is you've just done something really awesome.
Really good. It's like nailing something.
That's the whole trip to Sri Lanka, if someone did something really well, going, he's just released an album. So I would love so much if you actually released an album. Because that would be releasing an album.
Yeah, big time. Big time.
Well, good luck with releasing an album, Josh.
Thank you.
Hamish Macdonald is about to release an album.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Sure is.
Yeah, he's dropping a big one.
I mean, I know we're just using it as a metaphor, like the releasing an album, but for some reason, I can see him releasing a Bublé-esque Christmas album. For some reason, I see that happening or working in some way. Just put it out there.
Well, Hamish Macdonald releasing an album now. No, he's actually not.
No, he's not. No, he's not. We shouldn't.
This is a great interview, and we're very proud of this. And he did.
We let the metaphor get out of control.
Maybe it doesn't work. Hamish Macdonald, it's a wonderful listen. We hope you enjoy it.
I fall in all you do. The glade in the garden.
It is a lovely feeling in here today. It feels lovely because our guest has come in and he's made me feel lovely. How about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. It's a very warm feeling in the room.
It is. Yeah. Calm and warm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that because I'm sweaty and I've walked in a bit hot?
No. It's just friendly, happy face. It's good. It's a great
Calm
start.
and relaxed. And we're joined by Hamish Macdonald.
Yeah.
G'day, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Thrill.
Yeah, I was going to say thrill.
Yeah,
That's what it
I
is.
said it first.
Well,
so
just.
get your own word.
I'm a big fan of your show, and it's it means a lot to be invited on, and thank you for having me.
I think I speak on behalf of all of us that we're a big fan of everything you've ever done.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
And you have done so much.
Are you actually? Because I have listened to the episode where you talk about me scaring you.
There was one thing that
one
thing that you're not a fan of.
Can you remind me what happened?
So, I was just talking about how I had a stutter when I was in primary school, and occasionally it comes back at really inopportune moments.
Yep.
And I'd done the project a few times, and every time I'm on the project, it sort of comes back, and I was like, this time it won't. I'm feeling good, not coming back. And I sat down, and Hamish was on the panel, and he just did his job. He just asked me a question.
How dare you?
He just asked me a question, and it was like,
nerve.
I was talking about how I thought the big companies, the big tech companies, there was 100% their fault that we're all addicted to our phones. And then Hamish just asked a really good question, and I just completely froze. I was like, don't ever stutter now. And I just couldn't talk. Nothing came out. And then sort of Peter Hellier was next to me, and he kind of looked at me like, you going to say something? And I didn't because I couldn't get any words out. And then so Peter Hellier answered for me.
There was a period of about a week or two where every day I would get a text saying, have you listened to the latest episode of The Imperfects? You know, Hugh's worst fear is live television, and the worst version of that is The Project, and the worst version of that is you.
No,
and you should listen.
No, not you.
And it was not quite as emphatic as that.
No, it was
actual.
No, it was on the scale of 10 to 1, like 10 being challenged massively and 1 being like not challenged.
Easy breezy. Yeah.
It was probably like a 2 or a 3. It was just like,
yeah.
It was just like, oh, it was all you wanted was a clarification on something. And my brain went, you're being challenged. Oh my God. And I have so much respect for you and your intellect. I was like, I don't want to argue.
Bullshit this.
Yeah. I was like, oh God. And I just shut down completely.
It is a thing that happens though from time to time where you've had these kind of interactions with people on television or on radio. And sometimes they do get pretty robust, particularly with politicians or business leaders. And sometimes you meet these people further down the track. Perhaps you didn't even speak to them in person at the time. It was over the phone or Zoom or whatever. And they will say, look, that interview you did with me, you probably don't remember it from 3 years ago, but it really rocked me.
Really?
And I got your number and texted you and said, I'm really sorry after listening, because you do genuinely feel bad. You're never setting out in any of those contexts to make someone's day bad or to, sort of shatter their confidence. And it's kind of, I think when you are broadcasting a lot, you forget, when you're doing anything a lot, you forget that for someone else it might be actually a terrifying experience. So I'm definitely more mindful today of
not scaring you.
Yeah.
I mean, how much of like doing so much interviewing, and I guess we do a lot of interviewing now, I always forget that, but you do so much interviewing and you're on a panel and you're having like essentially, I mean, they're kind of curated conversations that you have on the project or on radio or wherever you might be. But does the things you pick up doing that, does that help you in general conversation with people?
My partner would probably have a very different answer to this, because sometimes he will say to me, you do not Radio National breakfast me.
Yes. Yeah. Like delving deep? Or?
Yeah, we'll be having a conversation or a disagreement about something, and I'll be really laser focused on a particular detail or an answer that is not quite consistent with a prior answer.
You're holding him to account on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like Hugh, I think Penny really struggles when in the morning you read her bio to her. She doesn't appreciate that.
She doesn't appreciate all the mistakes I made when I'm reading it out. That's the issue.
Yeah. I mean, your bio, Hamish, is just unbelievable. Like it's a list of the things, because I was like, reading it obviously in preparation for this, and I was like, whoa, that's a lot to fit into. And then when I found out you're basically my age, that was not a nice thing to find out.
Yeah, I was reading it going, he looks younger than me, but he's 65, obviously, because he's done all this stuff.
To fit all that stuff in, yeah.
May I read it?
You may.
And I'm going to actually read it.
Really?
As in, I need people to understand, because I knew that you did a whole lot of incredible, journalism and correspondence from overseas, but I didn't quite know. So just, you can tune out if you'd like for a bit.
Yeah, I'll go bright red in the face as this.
Okay. Originally from Jindabyne in country New South Wales, Hamish Macdonald is one of the country's most awarded and widely loved journalists. He's had an incredible career that's seen him report from war zones, natural disasters and major world events. He's covered conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Ukraine, a nuclear disaster in Japan, uprisings in Hong Kong and Egypt, the London bombings, the rise of ISIS, and reported from the field during Australia's 2020 bushfire crisis. Hamish began his career in regional radio and TV before heading overseas, first with UK's Channel 4 News and then Al Jazeera English, before joining America's ABC as international affairs correspondent. Back home, Hamish is a regular host on Radio National Breakfast for the ABC and reports for Foreign Correspondent. He is previously the host of... I nearly got through that.
That was really good.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I was trying to show off to Hamish. He was previously the host of Q&A on ABC TV and is now one of the current hosts of The Project from Friday. Oh, sorry. God, that was my last
one. That's all right. Stick with it.
He's on The Project as well. Hamish has received a prestigious... and this is an important part here. Hamish has received a prestigious Walkley Award and a Human Rights Australia Award for journalism. Britain's Royal Television Society named him Young Journalist of the Year in 2008, and GQ magazine named Hamish Media Man of the Year in 2012. In 2016, he was awarded a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard University. He now sits on the Walkley's judging board. Everyone at home, I hope you're clapping.
Your reading or the...
The reading was amazing.
Parts of it were, yes, I agree. And you're 41 years old. I don't understand how that's possible.
42.
And you're 42 years old. I don't know how that's possible.
Unbelievable. Whenever I see Walkley in a bio, Walkley that's still the kind of Everest of journalism, isn't it, in Australia?
Yeah, certainly for me it was. I mean, it was it was a big deal. I think certainly for a large part of my professional life, I probably was in a bit of a rush to do things. And it's been a bit of probably a hard lesson to just cool it a little bit over time. I think when opportunity presents, you sort of jump on all of it. And I think early in my career particularly, there was a lot of that, just sort of taking whatever the next thing was that came and not really developing much of a reflex around what the right things are to jump on. Because of course you can't go through life and everything just works.
Yeah.
And I guess through failures and things that don't quite work out the way you want, you kind of learn from that. But I think also I didn't really go into it really having a particular destination or goal in mind, and I kind of fell into the television bit of it somewhat. I actually had done sort of print journalism at uni, and I was so bad when we did a radio kind of news reading thing as part of the course that the lecturer at the time said, broadcast is not for you.
Really?
So it was really only down the track that I kind of lent into the TV bit.
So how old were you when they told you that?
I would have been 19 or 20. There was a community radio station on our campus. I went to uni in Bathurst in regional New South Wales, and the big part of it was practical. And I think when I did the kind of sound test or audio test, whatever it was, I just was so shit.
Well, do you think you were so shit, or do you think – because when I look back on those moments in my life, but then also when people say that, I often now wonder but were you actually shit, or was the person that told you that they just weren't attuned to what is good?
I think I laughed my way through it.
Okay. Okay. Right. So you were shit.
I was pretty ordinary. I think I just kind of found the sound of my own voice weird, and just kind of found it all a bit odd, and thought, okay, well, I'll just do print journalism. But and I did end up getting a bit of TV work here regionally, and then it was only when I went to the UK and worked at Channel 4 that I kind of saw a version of TV news that I really, really wanted to do and believed in. They were kind of quite different to anything I'd seen here. It was lots of foreign news, lots of investigative stuff. It was at the time of the Iraq War when that was going on. I used to work with a guy there who's a very famous British sort of anchor called Jon Snow, not Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, obviously. I once did a university lecture and was asked who my kind of journalistic hero was, and I said Jon Snow. And obviously, all of these Australian university students found that slightly weird. That I was sort of focused on the North Wall or whatever.
Yeah, because Game of Thrones didn't cover that side of Jon Snow's life, where he was running the local newspaper.
Geez, he did it well though.
He did really well.
He had to get his money from somewhere.
Yeah. The Wall Gazette. I know your I've read what you've written about your high school experience, but it really interests me because from what I read, from the article that I read at least that you wrote, it seemed like you achieved so much in high school and very, you wrote that you were a leader in many ways and had lots of, I guess, success in high school, if that's what to call it. But it was kind of a strange experience as well, though, for you. And I'm just sort of interested in how the transition from high school into quote unquote the real world, how that all played out for you.
Well, I guess I went straight from high school to university. So as you mentioned, Hugh, at the start, I grew up in Jindabyne in regional New South Wales. I went to boarding school in Sydney. It was a conservative Christian or Presbyterian high school. It was very strict. And I guess, I would describe the environment as homophobic. Not that I necessarily knew that particularly about myself at the time, but I suppose in those teenage years, you're coming to grips with thinking about those things and trying to understand yourself. So that definitely had an impact. Going off to university in Bathurst was an entirely different experience. It was a much more diverse and dynamic cohort, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and different parts of the country. It was a much more fun experience, I guess. That was sort of a shock. I think often kids that maybe struggle more at high school find their place in the world at university.
So you did feel like you sort of struggled at high school, or?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I was an okay student. I wasn't particularly gifted academically. I did all right. I was pretty decent at some sports, not all of them. And
was the school you're at, was it sports focused? Are they?
Oh yeah, it was absolutely one of those, hardcore boys.
All boys, yeah.
Very competitive, very macho environments. It was pretty physical in terms of, sport and violence and all the rest of it. And it was not, I think in retrospect, it was not the right place for me. It was where my dad went to school, and it was just one of those situations. We lived in the country. Dad wanted me there. I didn't really want to be there. It was a big kind of friction point for my parents in their, disintegrating marriage. And, definitely some pretty tough stuff. I think that shouldn't really happen to kids. I think happened for me and many others. And it, I guess when I look back on it, it was a very long period of time of being conditioned in thinking that if you're gay, something very wrong with you, that is something to be rejected or ashamed of. And, it definitely had a very big impact on, how I saw myself and what I thought about myself. And I think to this day, shapes some of how you react in situations and some of the, I guess, internal frailties that you might have.
Yeah, because you do hear that story from time to time, people feeling like when they're at school getting homophobic messages when they're gay is quite damaging. But when you actually stop and think about it, I think that must be one of the hardest things you could kind of go through as a young person growing up, trying to navigate that.
Look, in a weird way, in the moment, I don't know how much, it's hard to describe because you don't necessarily know you're gay. Right. If you're 14 or 15 or 16, you might not even know.
Okay.
Yeah.
You might have some feelings or you might think about things, but it's not like, and this is the 1990s we're talking about, it's not like there was lots of proactive teaching or, a lot of resources available about this stuff.
And piled on top of that, you're at a very traditional school as well.
Totally.
School, yeah.
And it's boarding school. So at the end of the day at school, you don't go home to a sort of safer, nurturing environment.
No escape.
Oh, not at all. You're there for the weekends. It definitely felt, it was at times dangerous, but, mentally there wasn't a lot of escape. And I guess it's more on reflection that I realize how it shapes you or affects you, because just even if it's not someone with malice talking to you, the constant refrain in the sort of schoolyard is poofter or faggot or whatever the particular word is. And as over time you start to realize that could be applied to you, you interpret it as a very negative thing. I mean, there are lots of examples of it being far worse and far more targeted and malicious than that. And I think, as is the way for many people, other people spot that stuff about you before you do,
Yeah.
And so that then creates this whole sort of rejection thing. You're like, well, I'm not that. I can't be that. And so you spend years sort of fighting against that, I suppose. And that obviously has a profound impact on who you are.
When you say there's a tension point for your parents, so your mum wanted you at home, obviously, that's kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more complicated than that. I don't think mum ever particularly wanted to be in Jindabyne, and they'd sort of gone there for a period, ended up staying much longer. Mum and dad ran pharmacies up in the ski fields and, just had a life there. It wasn't the only thing that was a big feature of our family life, but it was definitely a friction point. I think mum and dad had actually had a lot of trouble having kids. Dad had kids from a previous marriage, but my mum and dad had a sort of weird genetic situation, which meant that they'd had a number of children that didn't survive. Right, so they had stillbirths, and it was quite unexpected that they would have a successful birth in that way. And so, yeah, I guess mum felt, very strongly that she wanted her kids around her and she wanted to be with them. And it just was not a happy time, I guess, in our family life, and not something that was easily resolved. And I think it took me some time even to say to them, look, I'm very unhappy there, and this is what the kids are calling me, and this is the stuff that goes down.
So you were actually being called names at school?
Yeah, 100%. And
but were you being called those names with? Did other boys know you were gay or think you were gay?
Definitely thought I was. I mean, I didn't think that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It was a pretty difficult.
So does that sort of mean you have to, if they think that and you're associating that with this really bad thing that you don't want to be because it's got this negative, the way it's framed, are you then almost like turning off those feelings if they come up?
I don't really remember, to be honest, but certainly trying to turn that off more broadly in my life as I grew a bit older, and feeling ashamed of those things and feeling uncomfortable with the idea of it, and I suppose trying to figure out whether you could be something else, rather than just kind of leaning into this is who I am.
I mean, I just can't imagine. I mean, like, I've not being gay, I've obviously have no idea what that is like to go through that experience. But we all know what it's like to go through high school, where you really just want to generally like fit in, you want to like belong. So then, if you begin to realize that there is something different about you than all the other people at school, what a weird conflict in your brain.
Totally. I think something that I mentioned when I did write a piece in the newspaper about it was that when I reflect on it, I think there were some instances where I joined in the bullying or the tormenting as well of other kids. And I think that speaks to the power of what it is that it does to you. The fact that you might then sort of turn the attention to someone else because you're so desperate for it not to be
you.
On you.
Yeah.
I mean, like to the extent where you wrote in that article that the boy who was one of your main bullies is now gay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I in a weird way, I feel a little funny about having written that in the newspaper because it's not really my story to tell. But I do think that it speaks to the profound impact that those sorts of cultures and those sorts of environments have on individuals. And it can actually create quite negative threads and behaviours in us when we're in a context where it's not actually okay or comfortable to exist and be who you are. I suppose that's why I made that point.
Yeah.
It's really, I hadn't, obviously don't spend much time thinking about this now, but it's really bringing back such strong memories of high school as like, it's that the air that you breathe is that like, well, it certainly was then, and I hope it's changed, but that being gay is one of the worst possible outcomes. Because I was like quite sort of slow to develop. Well, ironically, I developed early, but then as far as like being with girls and stuff like that, I was quite sort of slow and timid and compared to a lot of the other guys, and I copped a lot of crap about, and the insult was always that you're probably gay.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't know if this is an insensitive thing to bring up, but I hope it's not. But I remember seeing Lord of the Rings and thinking Elijah Wood was like beautiful.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, they're right. And I remember this like month of thinking everyone's right. And how am I going to deal with this? Because this is, in the world that I'm in, this is the worst possible thing you can be.
Yeah.
And it was, I hadn't thought about that for years, but it hit me while you were talking before of that few weeks of like, and the panic and how am I, and I just didn't, and the fact that it was framed in this way of like, well, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That is, yeah.
I think what you're telling me is you're into twinks.
Yeah, you're not gay, you're just into twinks.
Yeah. And that's how that kink developed. That's how it began.
It's funny you say that.
Sorry to make fun of that.
No, that's great. That's funny.
Because I went through a stage of it's probably like a couple of months, and when I was maybe 20, where I thought, hang on, how do I know? Because how do I know if I'm gay or not? And of course, it makes sense in my head now that I would be like, well, you're attracted to men. That would be the biggest flag, it'd be the biggest.
That might help.
The giveaway. But I was like, sort of similarly to you, Josh. I wasn't a very confident young man when it came to sexual experiences, and so I wasn't like actively seeking out like sexual experiences with women. And so there was like a couple of months where I was like, well, maybe I'm gay. And then I remember started thinking, well, I'm not attracted to men though. But I haven't tried it. So, maybe you just don't know, until you have an anchovy, you just don't know if you like it or not,
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking for a little bit, well, maybe I am. And I didn't actually attach any negative thoughts to it because I was 20 by that stage, but I was more thinking, well, that will be a huge life change for me. And I remember having like the thoughts of like, okay, well, I'll have to tell these people, and I'll have to come out,
Yeah.
But I had no actual feelings towards men. It was not until I then had an experience with a woman, I was like, okay, no, I'm not gay. I'm not gay. And not that it was necessarily a relief in the sense that I'd feel ashamed of it, but it was a sense of relief that I wouldn't have to change my life.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine that once you realize that you are gay, the feeling of like, oh, well, now does it feel like your identity changes or your life changes?
I don't know about a sense of your identity changing, because I think my memory of it anyways is feeling quite strongly that I'm still me.
Yeah.
And how on earth would I explain that to people in my family? My dad is very conservative guy, comes from a Scottish background and kind of slightly hermetic mountain man. And, does hold deeply conservative views. So I guess that's the sort of family context for me. And there was a lot of like, how do I, the one, I think, impression that my father would have of gay men is the Sydney Mardi Gras.
Yep.
And people dancing around in, gold hot pants and whatever.
Yeah.
And how do I, it'll surprise you to learn that's generally not me. And
I would love it if it was.
Very occasionally. But how do I explain to him and them and my family that I'm very much still the person that they know, but there is this dimension to me. It just shouldn't reshape or change what it is they think of me. And I think that's, in one sense, that was correct, but I think that sort of setting and base setting for me probably meant that I have spent a lot of my life not really kind of being that at ease with who I am, or just kind of having experiences, or just living in a more relaxed fashion and trying things or going out. I sort of felt like I've, even as an adult, probably held myself back a lot for different reasons. I've lived in the Arab world or in countries where it's illegal, or, there's been a lot of other kind of complicating factors, or just even being, in the public and being in the media and being, for a period, quite sort of scared of what would happen if it came out and what the implications would be, and having journalists ask questions. There was always, at different times in my life, been kind of different pressures that I felt around what would happen if people know.
Yeah.
And I definitely have changed my views around that stuff over time, and I definitely now see the value in being more open and public, and just sort of being kind of, I suppose, a bit more straightforward about it. And I think when I went to live in the UK as a young adult, something that really stood out to me was how many people there were that were gay or lesbian, that were in the public eye, were in politics or business or the media, and it wasn't the sort of dominant thing about them. And I just didn't really see many examples of that in Australia. If someone was gay and out, that seemed to be the kind of main descriptor, and anything else they did kind of fell away.
Yeah.
And so I had this, I guess, example that existed in the UK where maybe it was possible to be successful at something or sort of pursue, some heights in your profession and be gay, and for both of those things to coexist equally and evenly and not kind of drown the other out. And so I don't know whether that we're sort of wanting that is the right thing ethically or morally, but it's the thing that sits well with me. I'm very happy and proud of who I am today, but I am also very proud that the main thing that I do and talk about and am in public is my work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe that's kind of complicated, and I'm sure there are people that say, look, that's not the right approach. Some people say, you should be totally out there and you should be constantly talking about your sexuality and your identity so that others can see that. But I think there are now examples of both. And I think that for other people in society, and particularly for young people who might be thinking about this stuff, it's great maybe today that there is a broader cross-section.
Oh, God. I mean, I just feel like if you're talking just like this about it, there's no doubt going to be lots of people who feel exactly the same way as you do. And so it's important that there is a cross-section of different people and speaking in different ways about it.
I love that there are people who campaign and, put it out there and are totally, lean into every dimension and minutiae of their life and put it out on the public stage. I think, generally speaking, I'm actually just a fairly private person. And that's nothing to do with sexuality. It's just, that's who I am. Yeah. And, I really believe in journalism and the value of journalism. And so there's a tension there for me in that actually journalism is about other people's stories.
Yeah.
And I've just always felt more kind of passionate about interrogating and sharing and finding other people's stories than my own. But I do also know that, it would have made a big difference to me 20 years ago, 30 years ago, having people in the public eye that talked about it and made it okay and meant that the conversation was sort of easier for people at school or people, that thought for 2 months, well, maybe, so that was a more kind of easy conversation that you could have had with friends or family. And so that the thought process you went through wasn't, oh, geez, I've got all these logistics I've got to contend with here and I've got a list of people I've got to tell. Maybe it could just be a conversation that you have with your best mate where you're like, oh, I'm sort of into Elijah Wood.
Yeah, he's beautiful. Yeah, still is. Without the negative veil around it, that this is just a discussion to have.
But also just a kind of exploration.
Yeah.
Like, I notice it now. I think more of my straight friends talk to me about this stuff today than what they did. I think, often, now men probably in their 40s observe young men in their 20s having a more sort of broader existence of life and probably experimenting with different things and trying different things and that being totally acceptable. And, it's definitely a comment that I hear quite frequently that, it would be very different if you were growing up today. You'd certainly be testing things out probably a bit more.
I was just going to see if you minded me asking you about when you did actually tell your dad.
Sure.
And your mum. Was that, must have been quite an ordeal to go through.
Was it an ordeal? I mean, I didn't tell them at the same time. My parents were not together then. I told mum many years before I told dad.
Okay.
And I think probably a big feature of that whole kind of time and process was that I did tell a lot of my family in my early 20s, and I got some feedback from mum and an aunt who I was very close to. Look, maybe don't tell your dad.
Ever?
I don't know if it was ever, but sort of for now. He probably won't cope or he won't quite know what to do with it. And these people, mum, my aunt, some of the people that I am closest to in the world and most fond of, hold in the absolute highest regard. And I think they said that out of complete tenderness and love and respect for me and also for dad. I probably maybe most like my dad in a physically I'm most like Dad, and probably spent, more time with him as an adult perhaps than the others. And yeah, they cautioned me, I guess, against it. And so I didn't for a really, really long time, probably another 10 years or so.
Wow. So how old are you when you told him?
Well, I only told him when my younger sister was getting married. And at that time, I was living with my partner. I was at Harvard, living in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we needed to come back for this wedding. And my partner was going to come and was going to come as my partner. And I just didn't want any drama, obviously, around it. But I knew I needed to tell him so that it wasn't a surprise. And so I wrote him an email.
Mm.
Yeah. And he wrote a great email back and basically, said...
It's an out of office.
In case of emergency, call your mother. Yeah, I can't remember the exact wording of it, but he said basically he sort of takes a non-interference approach with his children's lives, and that they're all free to do what they want and be who they are. And he wished us both well in the steeplechase of life, which was very much my dad. I have often described him as someone that is at home with strangers and a stranger at home. He's a very complex character who probably very much of his generation is amazing and generous and kind of giving to people that he doesn't know very well, or lots of kind of contacts all over the world and people that he's had a couple of interactions with and then kept in touch with for a life. But I think kind of didn't have a lot of, is intimacy a strange word to use in relation to your parents and children? Like not a lot of intimacy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, in a weird way, it was very easy to go on for years having the relationship I'd always had with my dad and not talking about it, because it's just not the kind of relationship that he has with anyone, I think.
And so were you happy with an email reply, or were you kind of deep down hoping he might call you?
No, I was pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
Like it kind of felt comfortable.
Yeah.
It felt
Maintain that level of distance, but also
kind of, yeah. I think it was a relief, definitely. Jake, my now husband, is amazing with Dad, and Dad really responds to him. I remember once we went down to visit Dad in Jindabyne, and I was sort of in the kitchen and Dad was giving Jake a hug. I kind of couldn't believe what I was seeing. Jake's an incredible human being and very generous with, my parents particularly. And, I think Dad has a good relationship with him. And, Dad has Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia, and Jake and I got married in May this year, and there was sort of really nothing that was going to stop Dad from being there, even getting COVID the night before. So he sort of had to sit to the side of the ceremony with the mask on and all the rest of it. But, I think it's a pretty big thing in my mind anyway, that my dad's gone on the journey that he's gone on, and so much so that he, came to a gay wedding this year, that I think is not something he would ever have anticipated, or anyone would ever have anticipated him doing.
It sounds to me like the ending of a really great, really happy movie.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah. Well, we're still here, so it's not over yet. But, do I regret not sharing that with him earlier? I don't really know. I try not to be a big regret.
Yeah.
Sounds like you did it perfectly.
Yeah.
Look, would I have had a different relationship with him during that decade or so? Maybe. We did some great travel together. I lived overseas for a long time, and something that was great about that for me was Mum and Dad coming at different times and us doing travel together. Dad and I went backpacking in Norway and, took the ferry up to the Arctic Circle and did hikes and fjords and all that. And I don't know, maybe in a different set of circumstances you talk about that stuff deeply then, but it just wasn't how it was. And I'm glad that he knows now, and I'm glad that Jake's in my life and my family's life. If I have children, I definitely hope that it's a different dynamic. But at the same time, I think as much as it's really shit what Dad is going through at the moment, and it's definitely not what, he's a very proud, physical, sporty, independent guy, to be kind of crippled with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia is sort of very difficult for him even still to accept. But what it has allowed, I think, is for us to have a different kind of relationship, and it is a lot more intimate because he's so reliant on, help. I'm in sort of every corner of his existence and life in a way that he would never have allowed or requested or wanted. And, but, we still go swimming quite a lot in the ocean pool at Bronte, and we have some really nice time, and I'm very grateful for that.
You've done so much in your career, like as an adult, like as a journalist, and everything you've done. But I'm interested to know if you've put any thought into the experience you had in those really formative years as a teenager. How has that experience impacted what you do, for better or worse? Like, as far as like that, I don't know, like as a journalist, as an interviewer.
How do I start this? I think for a lot of gay guys, there is a feeling through adult life that you really have to prove yourself. And I definitely know that for me, there was this relentless pursuit of trying to make my family proud, because I knew that there was this thing that one day they would know that wouldn't make them proud. And so I think I had a real determination and a real drive to get very far very quickly. I think also that sort of high school experience of, I suppose, emasculation made me probably a little bit crazy brave. I was very early on, so I finished uni 2001, was straight into journalism, around that time. So if you think about world events then, we're talking about invasion of Afghanistan, soon after 2003, the invasion of Iraq. Very early on in my career, in a way that definitely was not sensible, I was talking about, okay, I'm going to move to Baghdad and I'm going to just be a correspondent there.
As a way to almost impress
I think it was more, I will be braver and stronger and more fearless than any of you, and I will not have anyone tell me otherwise, and I will go there for longer, and I will be there for longer, and I will pursue stories harder than anyone. And I think that was not a really good way to go into it all. And I've definitely adjusted my approach over time. But when I look back on it now, I just kept putting myself in situations that were actually pretty dangerous. Like I went and lived in Malaysia, where it's actually illegal. I worked for Al Jazeera and ended up in Afghanistan. And then as my career was sort of growing there, they were trying to get me to live in Doha in Qatar, where it's illegal. I went and studied in Yemen for a little bit. I kept putting myself in situations where, if the truth were known, if that part of me was out, it might have been actually quite dangerous for me, and certainly quite dangerous for the people working with me. So I'm sure someone listening will say, well, there's an added layer of complexity there, because maybe you didn't want it to be out, and so you would put yourself in situations where you couldn't talk about that and couldn't be open about that with the people around you. So maybe that's something that I need to reflect on.
Feel free. If you don't want to go here, that's fine. Just tell me. But
you're so generous with your interviews, guys. I'm always like, no, this is the question. I didn't hear you answer that properly.
Yeah. That comes later.
Yeah.
Lock the doors, Bridge.
When I've heard you speak in another interview about this, and then you've spoken about it today again. It was brought up very briefly about your parents' divorce while you're at. Did it happen while you're at school or afterwards?
Yeah.
And the way, and I might be reading into this wrong, but the way it came across is in that you going to that school was a big factor. Had you at the time, or have you ever blamed yourself in that process, or did you ever take on any blame, or was it something other to you?
I don't know that I did. And obviously it's their relationship and, their story to tell, but that they really didn't get along.
Yeah.
And so I think that was always apparent, in my life. That was definitely a critical point in the whole process. But, it had been, I grew up in a household where there was a lot of disharmony.
Okay.
So in that sense, it was something that I was very aware of. In terms of the impact that that's had in sort of shaping my life, I think it's meant that I've always wanted to ensure that communication channels are open. They were not good at resolving challenges. They were not good at talking things out. And so I think from a very early stage, I was kind of doing the moderating thing.
How early?
Like really young. Yeah. And I think they would both say that.
Gosh.
And
that's quite a lot to take on.
Or
it didn't feel like it.
It didn't really feel like it. Just sort of, who knows what would be different, but it just feels like who I am.
Pretty good training for Q&A though.
But I'm sure you either have examples of this in your own life where people who have this. The family setting for me was not great communication. People really building up resentment, not talking for long periods of time. Even today, there's like people that just do the shutdown, and not talk for 5 years or 10 years and, hold these grudges and just don't resolve issues between them and sit on them. Maybe it's a Scottish thing. I don't know. But that just did not work for me then. It doesn't work for me now. I really believe in kind of mutual understanding and trying to communicate what's going on for me, but really listen and understand what's going on for you if there's a disagreement or a misunderstanding. And, I think there definitely would be people in my family that find it confronting that I want to have those conversations, but I just don't see how you resolve conflict without communicating and without genuinely trying to understand the other person. I just don't think you can get there. I don't really believe in the idea that time heals all wounds. I think time can make it easier, but I think unless you really understand what happened or what the other person thinks or wants, you'll never really resolve the problem, and you just get stuck in a loop by not resolving stuff.
And so, because that seems like such a pertinent lesson from the work that you do, but you sound like you had that before choosing the work, like that came first and then the work.
Maybe, yeah. I'm probably learning that in this conversation, to be honest. But yeah, I definitely saw the value in just having communication open from a fairly early stage. Again, I'm kind of cautious to go too far down this path because it's not my relationship to talk about. But there was a time where I was like carrying letters back and forth between them. It was just a genuine breakdown of communication, and I can see the damage that did then, and it's not how I want to be. If there's a problem, I'm pretty happy to cop my share of the responsibility, but I think you can only really do that if you talk about whatever's getting in your grill.
Open. Yeah.
We've sort of mentioned the conflicts that you covered, like as in the wars that you'd been to, and I'm so interested to know, you must have seen some stuff, with the work you're doing, but then also I'm so interested in the impact that has on you as a person as well. A young person, really young person who's gone over there with the intention of, I'm going to break these stories, I'm going to share what's happening over here. The world needs to see this stuff. You're probably not thinking too much about what impact this is having on me as a person. Have you had time to reflect on that now?
Definitely more time to reflect on that now. I've been thinking about it a lot recently with the conflict in Israel and Gaza. I think particularly that location was a place where I think it was 2014, I was working for ABC America, so the not Australian ABC, as their international affairs correspondent, and I was sent to cover an unfolding conflict there. And it was the first time in my career where I I guess I kind of hit a wall in terms of the amount of conflict I could cope with. Not that this was necessarily anything different or far worse than other things I'd seen or been in. I just, an American network is huge. They have huge resources and money, and they can just keep deploying you. So I'd been with them for a while, and it was just a very messy period in the world. And it meant that I was basically bouncing from one conflict to another, or one crisis to another. And, there was Ukraine, there was the schoolgirls missing in Nigeria, there was the rise of ISIS, and I was just kind of being bounced from one to the other. And for quite long periods of time, if you're over with an Australian network, generally the budget doesn't stretch that far. So you might be, in the zone for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. And then, once the story starts to run a bit thinner, they'll get you out because they basically just can't afford for you to be there for that long. The American networks, they'd keep you there for months on end. And even if you weren't doing stories all the time. So there was this slightly different dynamic being with the Americans. They'd just kind of leave you. That you might go there, the story's really hot for a couple of weeks, you're doing a story every day or multiple stories every day. That starts to taper out. But they say, oh, look, there might be a visit from the Secretary of State in a few weeks, or something else might go wrong. This is on the horizon. We'll just keep you there and sort of see. So you're there and you're in this very dangerous situation. You're kind of looking for stories, but maybe not getting them up. And it's a pretty, I think I found the psychology of that quite hard to manage and handle, a lot of time on your own or just stuck in a hotel. Often in these situations with an American network, you've got a big security detail, so you can't even you don't have freedom of your own movement. You've got to ask the security guys, could I do X? Could I go to the gym? And often the answer is no, because it's just there isn't anywhere for you to go. Or even if there is, it's, they deem it too dangerous. And yeah, in that particular instance, I was sent to cover a flare-up in Israel and Gaza, and I was doing the Israeli side. There was another correspondent in Gaza, and I was due to go in for the rotation in Gaza. But there was just sort of days and days and days on end where you were out covering whatever was going on in Israel, but not necessarily getting stories on air. And such was the nature of the way the American networks wanted the story. They always wanted you in it in a kind of big and dramatic way. You can imagine what I'm talking about. And so this was kind of a version of journalism, which I guess I had done a lot of, particularly working for Al Jazeera, where I was in a lot of places and stuff went down a lot. And, I think I was kind of okay at doing that version of TV, but I'd never found that the network kind of demanded that, oh, we're not going to put your story on tonight because, there just wasn't enough of you in it. But if something happens, make sure you're there and you film it and then we'll kind of think about a story. So I think for me at that time, what that really led to when we were covering the Israeli side of it was effectively chasing danger, chasing being there when something really bad goes on. And
to get the story on air.
To get a story on air. And knowing that I then had the rotation coming up to go into Gaza and really genuinely horrific stuff was unfolding there in terms of obviously there was kind of rocket fire coming out of Gaza into Israel. There was aerial bombardment going on from Israel into Gaza. But in Gaza, you've got less freedom of movement because it's a smaller stretch of land. And I guess there's effectively less places to hide. And I just hit a wall mentally where I just, for the first time in my career, felt like I just did not want to be there. And I didn't want to go into Gaza. I didn't want to be in Israel. And I rang the news desk in New York and said, you need to get me out. I need to go home. And I thought maybe I had PTSD or something, but I felt like I was not meant to be there.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, it was a kind of almost a visceral feeling of I don't want to be here. And I'd spent a day, maybe even 2 days. There's some kind of hills on the Israeli side overlooking Gaza. You know, you can Google this and you'll see the stories or versions of the stories that I'm talking about. There were some settlers that had put couches on a hill and were kind of watching the bombing of Gaza from afar and cheering. And it was a particularly, you know, often when wars happen, can bring out the best in people. You know, you see some of the most incredible versions of humanity, people doing extraordinary things, making an enormous sacrifice, saving other people's lives. But you also see the negative side of people's emotions and people saying and doing things that are quite callous or cheering when they see a bomb drop. And, you know, that was obviously, for obvious reasons, a very complicated story to tell. And, I think it was just the accumulation of the moment, but then all the years leading up to it. And I did not want to be there, and I managed to get out of there. And it was a sort of damaging conversation to have with a news desk, being a foreign correspondent that doesn't want to be in a conflict zone. And, you know.
What was their response when you asked for that?
Look, I mean, not terrible in the moment, but there were definitely repercussions, I suppose. But there were, I mean, I realized at that time I was really burnt out. I mean, I went and sought psychological help, and, you know, the view that was fed back to me was, look, there's not really any signs of PTSD, but you are very burnt out. And basically been doing it most of my adult life in one form or another, whether it was with Al Jazeera or whether it was ABC America or I did a brief stint for Channel 10 during that window of time when George Negus had a program. I was their kind of foreign correspondent. And, you know, just the world had gotten very messy, and I'd just been doing lots and lots and lots of conflict after disaster after conflict. And it obviously does, you know, you'd have to be in almost not a human to have those things not impact you. As I was thinking about things at that time, I had a realization that I'd built this career and life that actually wasn't very healthy for me and felt quite unsustainable. And a lot of the people that I had gotten to know over the years, people that had been my kind of heroes or idols, had stayed as foreign correspondents, you know, for their whole adult life, and generally had really messy lives. And many of them were kind of grisly old alcoholics or, you know, had substance abuse issues, or, you know, broken marriages and children scattered all over the world. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not in any way critical of them. I just observed these people who I thought I wanted to be like, having lives and existences that I didn't at all want. And it was very difficult to square all of that, I suppose. And I suddenly didn't know really what to do because it's like, well, I've been on this pathway all of this time, and I love parts of what I do, but I can just see that this is not healthy for me, and in the longer term is not going to be a sustainable or happy existence.
Had you met Jake at this point?
No, I had a different partner then.
Right.
Wonderful partner as well. But it was difficult to maintain a sort of steady home life because you can always be fished out. You know, something's blown up somewhere. There's a revolution unfolding somewhere. There's a war that looks like it's about to begin, and, you know, you would just get a call. Sometimes you just get a text message with, here's your flight booking, and you're like, I'm on holidays in Sardinia.
Really? And then there would be no, the expectation would be you just go.
Certainly for the American network, that was definitely their approach.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, they looked after you very well and paid you very well, but there was definitely an expectation that came with that. And they were always very polite, you know, like I think I was in Nigeria for 6 or 7 weeks at one point do you remember the Chibok schoolgirls that went missing?
Yeah.
And that was this huge story, and Obama was president and Michelle Obama was kind of on board, and everyone was holding up the signs and, you know, free the girls. And were there covering that endlessly. And my mum was coming over to visit in London, and I remember ringing the news desk and saying, look, mum's coming, in 2 days. I need to get back to London and be there to pick her up and whatever. And they're like, oh, it's so fine. Like we'll get a driver to pick her up. And I was like, no, it's not worried about the logistics of her getting from Heathrow to my house.
Yeah.
My mum's coming to visit and stay. I want to be there to see her. It's just, I guess it's.
I mean, like the politest no's ever.
Yeah, totally.
Because like I've certainly, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I've certainly in my busiest times, and it does not compare to the work that you've done at all, but I think this is quite a universal experience where it's like when you're really, really busy, often the things that suffer the most are your relationships. And you're so absorbed in the work that you do and the work that you love often, and you're so motivated by it and excited, and you want to achieve, and you know that to do that well, you have to commit yourself. Did your relationships suffer in that time?
For a long time, I just didn't really have proper, intimate relationships. I think I started a lot of relationships, and then I would just literally physically disappear, and didn't really handle those very well. Mm-hmm. I think it was sort of before I knew and understood the term ghosting, but I think I did do a bit of that, which is pretty, not a very nice thing to do. And that kind of life is very dislocating because you're there and then you're not. And then you come back unexpectedly. And when you come back, you're totally fried. Sometimes it would take you a week or 2 weeks of just kind of not really doing much, just being on the couch, just cooking healthy food, going for runs or going to the gym, just to kind of get yourself back into a sense of feeling a bit normal again, and coming down from the adrenaline. There's enormous adrenaline when you're in those places, and it's a prolonged period of adrenaline kind of pumping through your body. I'm sure you guys would know a lot more about this from the conversations that you have, but that sort of existence isn't very healthy. Often people ask you about the danger in a war zone, and it obviously is physically dangerous because there are bombs going off or people shooting or whatever, but often your experience of it is not really that much associated with fear that might come from that, because your life or your existence in those spaces becomes so practical and logistical. In Libya, covering that conflict, it was essentially a highway war. The fight would move up the highway or back down the highway, and you were constantly figuring out, okay, well, where is our base going to be for the time being? Is it Benghazi? Are we going to move further up the highway? The fighting's moving further along. Do we try and get to the next major town? Might we get stuck behind the fighting?
That is such a strange thought process to be having. Like, are you staying in hotels or like? What?
Sometimes, yeah. But sometimes you might get caught somewhere and you just have to find a house that's sort of empty and go and sit in the house.
Just a random house that just doesn't happen to have anyone in there.
Well, a town might be abandoned because the fighting's been going on, and the fighting might be somewhere one day and you're there trying to cover it, but then suddenly the front line can move many kilometres in a very short space of time, and you might get stuck on the other side of that front line and not be able to get back to where you were going to stay.
Have you had a moment in all this work you've done where you felt like I'm in a lot of trouble here, like we're in a really bad place here?
I've definitely been in live firefight situations, but generally speaking, if that's happening, you're doing a lot of things all at once. You're trying to work, you're trying to film, you might be trying to do a piece to camera, or you might be trying to make sure that your crew is safe, that you've got everyone with you. Is the camera person here? Is the producer here? Is the translator here? Where's our security people? Or maybe you're on a military embed, in which case you have an embed is where you go along with the British forces and you'll be on patrol with them. If you get stuck in a firefight with them, you have absolutely no control. You've got to do what you're told. So there's definitely been lots of instances like that, but you basically become incredibly practical in those moments because you sort of have to be.
So I always look at your experience of like jumping into Q&A thinking, gosh, he's so brave, but it's probably when you look at what you've been doing, it probably doesn't seem as such a brave thing to do.
Oh, look, it certainly didn't feel like it going into it, but it was definitely, in terms of my professional life, it was definitely, if not one of the hardest things I've done. And obviously Q&A is a show that elicits strong opinions. It's an opinion and, discussion format. Suddenly there was actually an individual, not just the show, for people to direct all of their opinion and anger at. And obviously the COVID period elicited even stronger opinions and, views from people that were based not just on their philosophy of the world, but actually their experience of the world as they were experiencing it in that moment. So being locked down or not being able to take their kids to school or being forced to have a vaccination or whatever it was. So it was definitely a lot.
So when people like tweeting you or DMing you or just so would you finish a show and then look at your phone and you're just inundated with?
I think what was surprising to me was that it wasn't just about finishing the show. They had this term there, pre-lash, as opposed to backlash. So part of the format, right, and the production model at that time was you put the panel and the topics up on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram
a few days before or something.
A week before, because that's how it generates the questions and it's how it gets the live audience. And they put your photo and your handle on all of this and send your questions. And
to you?
To the program, obviously, but you're sort of put there as the
face of.
The face of. And obviously we live in these, I think when Q&A started, it was obviously very novel to have a format like this where politicians and powerful people would come. And I really still do believe in the idea of that kind of level of accountability in public. How many countries in the world will the prime minister or treasurer or foreign minister or opposition leader
put themselves out there,
put themselves on live television and just answer questions from the audience? Like, this would not happen in America. It doesn't really happen. It kind of happens in the UK. They have question time, I suppose, but I don't recall the prime ministers or chancellors ever going on question time. So I think it's good in Australia that, we have that, I guess, slight egalitarianism still. So I think that part of it was novel when it began, but obviously, the world has evolved a bit and there's this whole idea that some people have that you shouldn't platform certain people. I think there's greater discomfort today with hearing opinions that are different to your own. There's a debate about the extent to which public broadcasters must reflect balance, and do you reflect balance even when maybe the alternative view is not based on fact? It's this much more complicated, nuanced discussion around the role of the media and the power that it has to kind of cast narrative and the authority that comes with deciding who you put on a show at a particular time. But in my particular, corner of the world at that time, it meant that a lot of people wanted to abuse the shit out of you for platforming, as they call it, a particular politician, even though that politician is publicly elected, represents their community, perhaps represents a different opinion to some people in the audience. But, in my mind, that's just what journalism is. You gauge a range of opinions. Obviously, you don't give airtime or free platform unchallenged to someone expressing views that are illegal or inciting violence or racism. Of course, you have standards, but if a politician is elected and has a particular position on coal or a particular position on lockdowns, I think that in a democracy needs to be debated. And I don't think it's a reason to either abuse that person or the host of the show, but that was definitely what happened. And I think as it went on, I really learned the extent to which people, even the guests coming on the show, were abused and attacked and sometimes threatened. It was a pretty, just not a healthy.
No.
Did it feel like bullying again?
It definitely, I haven't really thought about it in that context. I guess what it felt like, I think what was shocking to me, actually, maybe this is an answer to a slightly different question to what you're asking, but what shocked me was the desire or the need I had to be liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually as a journalist, you probably shouldn't really need or desire being liked, because it's not really why you do it. Actually, to be a good journalist, I think you have to be not too worried whether people like you and okay with it when they don't. And I think definitely through these last few years, I've gotten much better at being a bit less bothered by that. But it really did come as quite a shock to me that it rocked me so much that people could be so angry with me and were willing to express it publicly. And it also was, it was destabilizing to me that I cared that much and that it drove such fear and anxiety in me to the point where, I would be preparing to go on air and sort of stricken with almost a kind of paralyzing fear about what was to happen. Because actually, each show something would blow up and it would end up as a viral thing on social media, and it would end up as, the top story on the news websites and in the newspaper next day. And so each time you were kind of going on air, you knew that something would explode. You just didn't know what it would be. And that was pretty unhealthy for me.
So, I only ask you this because like online bullying is obviously, doesn't matter if you're famous or not, it can happen to anyone. But as someone who has literally been in war zones and has felt the burnout and just the mental load of like being in such intense, real conflict where you could literally die, and then also having faced the wrath of like online conflict directed at you personally often, what was like ultimately for your just mental health, what do you think was worse?
I can answer that, but I want to be respectful of the fact that there are wars unfolding in the world today that people have no choice
of course
to be in and can't extricate themselves from. I suppose for me, in working as a foreign correspondent, even if I didn't exercise it, there was always the option to leave or get out, or at least, would be soon.
Yep.
Yeah.
With the experience of doing Q&A, particularly at that time. And remember, most of us were in lockdown in one form or another. It definitely felt kind of inescapable. And I also felt like I was, at least initially, having the conversation into the void a little bit. I realized that the world has gone on a journey with social media. What it was in the beginning is not what it is now. I loved social media. I was a first adopter of things like Twitter in newsrooms. Almost every newsroom I worked in, I was like the young guy that was like telling everyone about Twitter. I remember when I came back here to work on the Negus program, and they were like, can you sit down with George Negus and convince him to get onto Twitter? I was unsuccessful. But, there was a lot of environments in which I was using social media where I was kind of the first person to be doing it in a kind of news setting. And it was really exciting. During the G20 protests in London, I think it must have been 2008 or 9, if I'm correct. Someone listening will tell me if I've got it wrong.
Please do it in a nice way.
Yeah, you want that.
I'm not on social media anymore, so tell these guys about it. Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister, so you can do the maths. So sort of early GFC, I think. And there was this huge protest in the city of London outside the Bank of England. I was there covering it for Al Jazeera, and the police did this tactic called kettling, where they basically encircle the protests in a very wide perimeter and then kind of move it in. And so they kettle the protest, as it were, and then they just basically keep it all locked in until the whole thing calms down. And it was very controversial at the time because actually someone ended up dying and it became a big story. But I was caught in that kettle and was tweeting the whole thing. And it just was such a kind of dramatic change in the way we did our work. It got picked up by, every news organization under the sun. And it was just suddenly this exciting thing that as a journalist, you could be there doing the television crosses and doing all the stuff that you have to do, but there was another mechanism for getting it out. And soon after that, the Arab Spring began, and I was in Egypt as the revolution took hold. And, they were talking about Twitter-based revolutions and everyone in the square tweeting. There was the Tunisian revolution and Libya, and social media was a huge part of that. So I really had seen it as this very exciting tool, something that I loved being in conversation with audience. I got tip-offs from people. People would DM you with story ideas, or you would get these kind of amazing interactions. And it probably gave you a little bit of power in the context of your employer. The broadcaster you work for wasn't the sole way in which you could.
Yeah, it's some autonomy.
Yeah. So that was in my head had largely been a positive thing, and just to so suddenly at what I guess I felt like at that time was the kind of peak of, or what should have been the peak of my career, going to host, this amazing show on the ABC, to suddenly just kind of be hit with this wall of hate and kind of constant barrage of kind of quite humiliating, sometimes homophobic, but often just, insanely critical interaction was hard. And I think what also shocked me was the frequency with which it jumped out of just being in social media into your real world. So I would take a lot of steps to make sure that I tried to decompress from the show the day after. I'd get up early. I'd go down with Jake to the beach. We'd try and do an ocean swim and just try and kind of not be connected, not online. But, you'd be crossing the road and some guy would walk up to me and be like, geez, they hated you on social media last night. God, they really ripped into you. That thing you did. And it's like, can you just give me a break?
Yeah.
It sometimes jumped from online into your real life, and it just meant you weren't present with your partner. You were not able to escape the kind of thought process around the show and just whatever the rancorous discussion was. And there was one incident towards the end where someone did turn up at our house and wouldn't leave the front gate. And I never felt in danger, but it really brought home to me very clearly that I sort of needed to make a choice about what I was prepared to have in terms of the balance of my work and my
What's
life.
the cost? Yeah.
Jeez.
I didn't know you're not on social media anymore, which just inspires the hell out of me. But
It's pretty awesome, I have to say.
do you think the fact that you're not on social media now, has that given you any, not that you needed more, but any extra element of like courage to be able to like talk about things knowing that you can't get personally attacked?
It's definitely changed my approach to my journalism. I think I'm just more clear-sighted about it, and I don't really think about what's the social media noise going to be on this, which I think did tend to shape things for me. I think I've worked in the media a long time, and I really see the damaging effect that social media has on people. Co-hosts, people that I'm on set with, or guests that come on, particularly women. The abuse is horrific, particularly women of color, particularly conservative women. There are sort of particular demographics that just seem to, and I think the statistics back this up, cop it far worse. And just damaging to people. And it's really hard to talk to people and say, listen, I think you should get off social media. It's often not something people really want to hear. And they'll say, oh, look, I've taken the apps off my phone. I'm finding it better. I've done interviews with people on air where we sort of discuss the issue, and, I've had it said to me, look, it's a real position of privilege that you can get off. And, you need to understand that for some people it's a lifeline. And I do get that. Maybe there are people in particular settings where they need that outlet because perhaps the environment that they're in is not safe. And of course, I respect that. But I don't think anyone could make an argument at this time that would convince me that particularly Twitter, or X as it's now known, is anything other than a deeply toxic and unhealthy environment. But I think more broadly, social media has become a hotbed of mis and disinformation. I think it's undercutting any sense of shared truth that we have as a society. So I think there are much bigger implications to this just beyond just the individual. I think it's fracturing the way we all see the world. Not that I think journalists or one media organisation should have a stranglehold on the truth, but I think what it has done is it's undermined all of our sense in reality. Because yes, if we were all journalists and we were all observing the one event, we would all observe it a bit differently and would report it a bit differently. But what happened, happened.
Yep.
And there is a fundamental or a central truth to what happened. And the healthy thing about having a diverse kind of public narrative is that you'll get different perspectives on that. But ultimately, we'd all be observing the same thing. And I think what's happening on social media more broadly is that it's not all seeing the same thing. And in fact, there are a lot of instances where it's deliberately being misleading about what has actually happened and tried to find, I guess, less than truthful ways of explaining those things, or seeding information into the conversation that makes us doubt what it is that we all just observed.
I've never thought about it in terms of, well, most of what you just said, to be honest. I think it's just an incredible way to look at it. But also, particularly, I think how you said you feel like you're more clear-sighted as a journalist. I think you said clear-sighted. And it just makes me think about artists in general as well. And I think often in all types of, whether it's commercial art or any sort of art or television, radio, I do think that social media means that people do hold back some of their more, not even necessarily controversial, but outrageous or cliff's edge kind of ideas because of the potential or the actual fear that you're going to be criticized immediately. And so I think people often, like, their ideas and work can become vanilla as a result, when really it's like, I mean, the first person who did, I don't know, Nutella ice cream would have been like, oh, I don't know. But if that person was on Twitter.
That radical, that revolutionary.
Revolutionary. But like, if, you know, but like to have the courage to be able to do the idea that no one's done and people might not be ready for yet, but will ultimately potentially shift a belief or show people what's possible in a positive way. I think, I believe that you're probably, the average person would be more likely to do it if they didn't have the social media that people could then instantly criticize them.
I think, you know, there's obviously two sides to the coins we're thinking about and talking about.
Yes.
And one of the sides to all of this is that…
I'm glad one of us has worked at ABC. You can give the balance.
Well, I guess it has made us conscious more of our language, and it's made us more conscious of how different people interpret things differently, how it's possible that something that you might say or do, your intention may be good, but it may come across in a very different way. And maybe that is a good thing, that we've kind of come to have a better understanding of that. But yes, you're right. It kind of tempers our willingness to be out there or to say things. It definitely tempers discussions. It definitely, so often I'll sit down to do an interview with someone that's a pre-record, and they'll start every answer by saying, you know, that they kind of providing all of this context for why they're about to say what they think. And sometimes, you know, we can all have ideas or views. We can also all have stories. And you don't need to, I think, justify the telling of your own story necessarily. You know, I see it, I hear it a lot now when I'm interviewing people, just the fear they have that what they're about to say might be perceived in a particular way. And it's almost like you want to grab their hand and say, hey, it's okay. You know, the people that you're trying to talk to will understand this. But, you know, maybe that's the whole wanting to be liked thing. We all kind of have a bit of that.
For sure.
Well, that's what social media provides, the possibility that we can be liked instantly.
Why, you were sort of saying that at the start of this that it's obviously something you have thought about or
constantly
tussled with. So why don't you?
I was tempted to ask you. I kind of want you to sort of sell it to me, to be honest, because I even just a couple of weeks ago, I thought that's it. I'm off. Not because I had a bad experience, just because I kind of got to a point where I was like, why do I even have it? Like, what's the point? I'm not really using it for anything that special other than spreading, stuff
Content.
about the Imperfects, but really at the moment, that's all I'm using it for, is to tell people about like new episodes, and that is helpful. Like that can be really helpful. And I love that I can do that. But the Imperfects has an Instagram account, so that's doing that. Hugh does it, Josh does it. So I kind of went to a place where I was like, oh, maybe I don't need it. Maybe this is the time. Maybe I just like cut the tie, because I definitely I have more of a negative experience than a positive experience with. And I only really look at Instagram. I have a Twitter account, but I never look at it. But I keep it. What I talked myself into, this was where it got to, was because I have multiple journal entries about that. Like it always starts with, I'm leaving Instagram. It's just to myself. It's just like me like trying to. And the thing I got to was like, oh no, but it's a good platform, and like, which it is. It's a great platform and marketing tool. If and when I create my own work, it's a great way to be able to like tell people, here's something I just made.
Yeah.
And it was very helpful for a couple of years when I was making lots and lots of just independent work, just videos and things. And in the past, I did do lots and lots of stuff on Instagram. I loved it, but over time, my relationship with it has become a little bit more like I'm annoyed that it's in my life.
Yeah.
But I feel like I can't. It's like a friend that you can't break up with. It's kind of like, oh, you've been with me for so long. We did have really good times. I can't just not have you in my life, can I? Because there are good things.
I reckon there's a tendency, and maybe you're doing this a bit as well, to think of these platforms as kind of fixed entities that are just there and are sort of the same, and that we're the ones that are kind of changing, or we've become more affected, or we've become a bit more vulnerable to them. And I think the reality is that they have also grown and evolved in particular ways. Some would say more positive, some would say more negative. But I think, as with all relationships, it's kind of okay to like sit back from them and saying, look, we've both been growing here in different ways, and the reasons that I had for using this at a particular time are no longer there. They're not in my life. I can leave it to these two mugs to do the.
I'm pretty keen to get off now as well. I reckon I feel strange.
It's a shame.
No,
that you've got
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
Really?
I'll commit to doing it, getting off.
Really?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Love it.
Why?
Yeah. So I released a song recently and was blown away by the feedback I got. But I have hated the fact that I've now want to look for, I'm like, I want more. And I hate it. And I think and writing that song was,
you love the feedback, but you hate your
Sorry,
behavior.
to clarify, I'm really appreciative of, and I was just thinking I'll do, because I never post anything really, but I'm going to make a post, because I haven't done one in ages, just thanking everyone.
Make a post.
Yeah. As you can tell, I'm a real
really authentic user of social media.
Yeah.
Look up how to do that on the Google.
yeah, absolutely. I'll ask my mum. But I was thinking that the song and this show, the things I'm most proud of creating and the most enjoyment I got out of doing it was writing that song when no one knew it was happening in the world, and it was a completely isolated thing that I was doing. You guys, Bridget, Ryan, knew about it, and that was it. And the most enjoyment I've gotten out of this show was before I cared about putting it on social media, and before. And I know it's a reality of having the show, but I enjoyed it more when I couldn't check what people thought about the show. And I hate that I check, and I hate that I read it, and it lessens the enjoyment of everything else that I love. So I think I'm getting off because of that. So I'll do it.
Very good.
Brilliant, Josh. I'm excited for you.
Yeah, I'll do it. I don't know if I've got time today, but I'll do it tomorrow.
I'm happy to take that. I'm happy to do that for you. I'd like to kind of live vicariously through your account deletion.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to have, I didn't do this, but when I reflect on it, I think it would have been helpful to have a thing in my head that was going to somehow replace it, even just in terms of like a metric of time within the day. But I just read a lot more deeply. You know, I spend time looking at, you know, the Financial Times and their foreign section, or the New York Times, but just actually going in and taking the time to read I have this kind of rule that I have to, if I open it, I got to read the whole article.
Yeah.
And there's a great bookmarking function, and I sort of save the ones for when I've got like a bit more time later in the day. And I just think I consume news and information now quite differently. I got a lot more into podcasts. And so I just kind of filled that, you know, like brain space with something else over time. And maybe that, if you're going to do it today or tomorrow, you know.
Absolutely. No, I feel really inspired and excited about it, actually.
Yeah, I just love the way you put it, that like you, as if it's an entity, like both the person and the platform, they grow in different ways and evolve in different ways. And it's so right, the reason you got into it. There's a great article actually, which we could link to. It's called, I think it's like Why the Internet Isn't Fun Anymore.
Yeah.
And it's essentially all because it used to be you'd find these random websites and you go like, oh, look at this. I can't believe this website exists. And you just get ensconced in this website. But now all of our attention is funneled through just a few platforms, like whether it be social media or Google, and our attention is more or less controlled to look at things that sometimes can be very fear-mongering, or whatever you might be looking at. But the discovery of the internet is far less now, even though it seems like you're discovering lots through Instagram or Twitter or something. The truth is that you're not. You're only on 3 or 4 sites.
So I think, you know, obviously it is a big thing to be like, I'm going to switch it off, and that is the right choice for some people. It's not for others. But I do think it is about setting a course. You know, people do respond to kind of slight behavioral changes and invitations to engage in a particular way. You know, they obviously have a lot of power and authority in deciding how the algorithms work. What if the algorithm, instead of responding to and promoting the antagonism and just pure engagement through people being, you know, if you click something that's going to inflame and then you get people fighting underneath, and then that promotes the whole thing up the top of the page for everyone. What if an algorithm promoted positive conversation or constructive conversation? Yeah. What if it promoted length of post? Or what if it was able to promote relevance to the original article or relevance to the prior comment? You know, the people that design these things are incredibly clever. The robots that operate them are unbelievably sophisticated. There's nothing to say, I think, ultimately, can you actually promote sensible discourse? Can you promote pluralism? Can you use these systems to help us all to be more capable to hold multiple ideas in our head on one subject at one time?
You need to copyright that app. That sounds great.
I know. If you did that, you would unfortunately be at risk of improving everyone's mental health. And
Which would be devastating.
That'd be devastating, of course. I don't know if we're ready for that. Wow. I think that is profound. And I reckon, I mean, who knows if that will ever happen. I hope it does.
I'm probably hopelessly naive in that regard. But I think they have the power to do it differently, and they choose not to.
Yeah. Well, it'll get Josh back onto social media if
as an 80-year-old when they work it out.
Well, that can be the way you fill your time. You can come up with this other platform and a name.
Yeah.
Oh, Hamish, it's been so great to chat to you. I feel like we've sort of wandered into 2-part territory with some of our guests. I feel like I want to make this a 3 or 4 part, just like Hamish comes back every week and gives us more insight. It's been so thrilling to chat to you, to learn about your life, the path that it's set you on, the way that you've responded to different things around the world, and the journey you've been on. It's fascinating and really inspiring as well. Really inspiring, and really appreciate you. For someone, you said at the top that you're a reasonably private person, to share what you've shared today, I think is really big, and I think it's going to help so many people, and that's why this podcast exists. So Thank you so much, Hamish.
Thank you for having me. It is a genuine honour to come on, and I do want to say thank you to you guys, because I think you do something that is genuinely creating good and different conversation. I've learned a lot from episodes I've listened to that you guys have done, and you've introduced me to different ideas and different people that I wouldn't have heard otherwise, and I think that's a really wonderful thing. And the number of men that listen to you and are challenged in what they think, the number of women that listen to you that I know that make me go and listen to things that you do, I think it is really fantastic. And so, in the interest of good, robust, plural conversation in the public domain, I want to say thank you too.
Oh,
That's
wow.
beautiful. Thank you.
That's pretty cool.
That's really cool.
Yep.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you, guys.
I gotta keep on myself. Keep on.
Hamish Macdonald. What a man.
The third Hamish to appear on this podcast.
True.
Yeah.
True,
Do you
true.
want to rank them? Rank them?
Best to worst Hamishes.
I do not want to do that. No.
Nor do I.
I mean, weirdly, I'm pretty sure Hamish Blake has Scottish heritage. And I wonder if McLaughlin does as well.
Mm.
I mean, Hamish obviously is a very Scottish name.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can find out. But yes, I'm so glad to have met him. What a lovely, lovely guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So two things I want to talk about that stood out for me from that episode. And we'll do it quickly because that was a long chat. So we don't want to hold people up too long. Just so two things I want to talk about very quickly is social media.
Yeah.
And the other one is burnout.
Yeah, social media, Josh. I mean, because I'm not looking at it that much.
Yeah.
I don't know if because we recorded that
about
like
a week ago. And I said I'd quit
tomorrow.
in a day.
Yeah.
I feel like I've looked at it more.
Interesting.
I went to, and then I was like, maybe you're just not using it. Like I was like, I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, the episode's not coming out for a while.
You got time.
As long as I do it before the episode's released.
But now we're here.
And then I was like, I've had a few people writing about the song. I need to get back to them. And now we're here a week later and I haven't done it. And weirdly, my brain and the way the algorithm has worked together, I've ended up going, well, maybe you're just not using it properly. So you need to use it more to like get more out of it, because you just sort of like were getting all of the negatives of not, because I barely use it. I was just getting the negatives of having it draw me in, but none of the positives of interaction.
Yeah.
So weirdly, my brain and the combo, it's like a drug dealer has gone, no, you just need better stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting comparison because, I mean, the two of you are wanting to get off for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
Hamish was getting a lot of hate and a lot of negative stuff. And you, on the other hand, you're getting lots of lovely stuff, but even that's a bit overwhelming for you. So you're thinking, I don't want to be there. So,
well, yeah, the lovely stuff. Because I just want to tell everyone, like, there's things that people have written are incredible and I really am appreciative of it. But I just feel like my brain can't, it's like it's a seduction that I need, that I can feel myself needing it more and going like, well, when it all dies off, which is going to happen, where will my brain be? Where will I be then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So totally different reasons, but still seeking the same outcome, really, an escape from its endless world of validation and seeking validation, and then not feeling like it's never enough, no matter how much you get, I guess.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to just very quickly was talk about, for other people who are thinking about doing this, I just like to talk about the reason that I check social media, I've realized, and I think this is like the same, I think a lot of people, I'd love people to be conscious of this. The reason I really check social media a lot of the time is just to numb negative emotion. Like that's if I'm being very honest. So there's a point at night, every single night, when Penny and I are putting the kids to bed, so 3 kids under the age of 6, and we're just going through this stage, which has been the last probably 3 or 4 months, where without doubt, like meltdown after meltdown after meltdown around not getting in the bath, then not wanting to get out of the bath, then not wanting this towel, then wanting that towel, then not wanting to put on pajamas, then not happy with those pajamas, then don't want to read this book, then where am I going to sleep? And it's just meltdown after meltdown it's really hard and it's quite upsetting and it's just really full on. There's a moment when I go upstairs, when I grab my phone, I had this thing of like, just leave it down here. Like this is, it's like you got up here for an hour and a half, you don't need your phone. It's like, it's 6 o'clock at night. You don't need to be on your phone right now. And I noticed for the last 2 or 3 months, I just take it up anyway. And then I was paying attention to when I'm looking at it. And without fail, when a meltdown happens or something really hard happens, I grab my phone and quickly have a quick look at Instagram, whatever it is. And it's like all I'm trying to do there's nothing, no one's messaged me. I haven't got any like it's not a notification I'm responding to.
No one poked you on Facebook.
No, no one poked me on Facebook. But I'm still grabbing and having a quick look. And I know what I'm doing is I'm trying to numb the negative emotion. And about a week ago, Elsie said to me, she was trying to, it had been really hard, and then she'd moved past this hard stage and was just trying to choose a book. And she asked me which book she should choose, and I didn't respond because I was looking at my phone. And she said, "Daddy, you're always on your phone." And it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt so unbelievably bad. I felt like going, well, it's you and your brother's fault. But I didn't say that because it's not really.
Was she just sitting there reading Stolen Focus by Johann Hari? Smugly flipping through it. You are always on your phone, Daddy.
She should have been. And it really hit me quite hard. And I thought, this is just, like, I talk about this all the time. It's a big part of the Amazon show is like, is this bit on how we shouldn't be on social media in front of, shouldn't be on our devices in front of our kids. I know it all, but I just have been turning to it to numb this negative emotion. And so I got the K-Safe out, the thing that Johann Hari recommends. You mentioned Johann Hari. He recommends the K-Safe, this little jail for your phone. You lock it away from anywhere from a minute to 24 hours. I got it back out again, dusted it off, put new batteries in it. And I've said to the kids, the second I walk in the door, I want you to all yell at me, put your phone in the jail. And they love doing that, and I put it in the jail. And
they would love it.
So much. Especially Benji gets so excited. And then I set it till 8 o'clock, which is after they're asleep, hopefully, all things going well. And then I can get it out again. And so this has only been about a week now of doing that. And what I've noticed is, like, the meltdowns happen and negative emotion sets in for all of us. But then I write it out with them, and I get at the other end of the negative emotion is a positive emotion. Like, I just feel good after I've got through it because we've got a resolution together. We've worked through it.
Sounds like a little resilience project you're working on there.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, good name for it. But whereas when I had my phone, I didn't get that positive emotion. I just numbed everything. And just sort of float along this numb, vacant, distant kind of experience. Whereas when I don't have my phone there, I go through the tough stuff with them and we come out of it together, and it feels good together. And so I just want people to pay attention to why you are checking social media all the time. Like what's when you grab it, what emotion are you feeling when you grab it? Are you feeling lonely? Are you feeling bored? Are you feeling upset? Are you feeling stressed? Is that's what driving you to numb it? And if that's the case, then look at ways to get away from your phone, lock it in a jail, or take the drastic measure of deleting social media. So just something to think about.
What's the benefit of, I mean, obviously you just said that you you write it out together with the kids, but what are other benefits of not, because essentially you're sitting through the discomfort of that negative emotion. So what's good about doing that?
Well, for me, the main thing, there's two things. There's my kids get me 100% present, which is what they should have. It's outrageous that for the last 3 or 4 months of them having these, like they're having tantrums because they're struggling with something. They're not emotionally kind of regulated. And their dad, who's meant to be helping them through it, is looking at things. He's looking at things on Instagram or checking WhatsApp or checking email or whatever. So the kids get a huge benefit, but I'm also, I don't know, I feel happier when I go downstairs at the end of that ordeal, the 2.5 hour ordeal. I just feel happier.
Yeah.
That's as simple as that. I feel happier.
Yeah, I feel sometimes with I've never been able to articulate this well, so I'll give another crack and see if I can get it wrong again. But a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, but some of the time when you're parenting, as you've just moments like that, it can be really difficult. And I find that if I try and get through those moments or those periods of time, sort of half in it, going and saying to myself, "This is so hard. I wish I wasn't here. I wish I could just have a bit of time to myself." Then they become much harder. But if I lean into them and just am like, well, I'm in here to work this problem and I'm 100% here and I'm just going to give it my all, it's never as bad.
Yeah.
It's when I'm looking for an escape or trying to say to myself, and I understand that sometimes we all bring different levels of energy and tiredness and stuff to every situation, and the demands of that situation can be so hard that you're like, I just need to get out. But when I'm able to muster the energy to be like, no, I'm going to find we're going to work through this together. It's never as bad.
Yeah.
It's when you're looking for an escape in any form, I think that parenting becomes a lot harder.
Yeah, totally.
For me, anyway.
Totally.
Yeah.
I totally agree. When you're committed to the struggle, you work your way through it much quicker. I think that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So the other thing I want to talk about very quickly was just burnout, because Hamish spoke about when he put in an SOS call back to the US saying he needed to be taken home and get out of the war zone that he's in because he was just completely burnt out. Now, that may not resonate with a lot of people being in a war zone, but I just want to talk about the symptoms of burnout because for a long time I used to say to people, I'm so burnt out, until 2019 when I was properly burnt out the first time. It's totally different. So if you're unsure, there are two things that can happen, both physical and mental symptoms will occur. The physical ones, I think things people will be sort of aware of. It's like you lose your appetite, your sleep patterns change massively, like maybe you wake up in the night and you can't get back to sleep, or you take forever to go to sleep, or you're just exhausted and want to sleep the whole time. You're more likely to get sick. You find it harder to get better when you are sick. So they're kind of the main ones. It can be stuff like unexpected aches and pains and headaches, but I think it's mainly those top three. The mental and emotional ones really interest me because these are the ones that I noticed for the first time in my life back in 2019. I felt very bored with the work that I was doing, even though it was very fulfilling and I felt like important work. I still found it quite boring. I found it very boring. I felt checked out a lot of the time, like I just wasn't present for things. When things were going around me, I just wasn't really there for it. And I remember being quite stressed by that, going, why can't I stay in this? Why can't I concentrate? My memory was terrible. Like I was forgetting stuff that just I shouldn't have been forgetting. This is on the work front. I had a lot of trouble having fun and relaxing. So when I get away from work, I'd be like, oh, relieved I'm away from work. And then I'd find it hard to relax and just have fun on the weekend or whatever it was. I was thinking about work constantly, even though I found it boring. And I was always fantasizing about like switching careers. I was like, oh, I wonder what, like I look at other people doing their job and go, that looks good.
Yeah.
That looks good. I'd love to be a builder.
Oh, yeah.
Or I'd love to be a barista. Like,
I love that you chose builder as something that isn't stressful.
I know. I don't know.
And something you'd be good at.
But that's how irrational it is. Like you're just picking jobs out of nowhere.
Oh, no, I do that. I used to work in retail and sometimes I'll go into shops and just think like, I mean, retail's not easy, but I remember I just look at shops and I'm stressed out and go like, God, that'd be nice to just have a shift, like a 12 till 4 shift and go home.
Totally.
Yeah.
The other thing is which I found myself doing, you fantasize a lot about moving, like moving state, moving country. Just like, it's like, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to live here. I'm going to live there.
Running away.
Yeah, that is often a sign of burnout as well. So that's just for people who are unsure, am I exhausted at work or am I burnt out? That's your checklist just there. There's
Really
so many
good.
things I experienced in 2019. So,
And also, if people want to hear more, there's the episode we did with Dr. M on stress and burnout,
yes. Yeah.
which probably has a lot more in-depth stuff as well. That might,
Great back reference.
And it has a lot of
Thanks very
stuff that
much.
you can do if
Yeah.
you are dealing with burnout, which is really great. So Hamish Macdonald was wonderful. If you'd like more from him, his podcast is called Take Me to Your Leader. It's a really fascinating look at political leaders from around the world. And Hamish is that's right in his wheelhouse. So you'll enjoy that thoroughly.
Awesome. Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone.
There you go.
The glade in the garden, fog in the dark night. I fall to stay with you.